What happens when you reveal a truth you've kept buried for 50 years on live television, and Dr. Phil stops the cameras? Stop. Stop the tape right now. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a blade. The cameras froze. The audience held their breath. In his hand, an envelope sealed since 1974. What was inside would shatter everything. What happened next, no one in that studio, or watching at home, was prepared for. 20 minutes earlier, the show had started like any other Tuesday taping. Margaret Chen, 72, sat in the guest chair, her hands trembling slightly as the makeup artist did final touch-ups. She'd flown in from Portland, Oregon, alone. No family. No support system. Just her and a secret that had lived in her chest for half a century. The pre-interview had been standard. Producers asked the usual questions. What brings you to Dr. Phil? Margaret had answered carefully, her voice steady but distant, as if she were reading from a script written by someone else. I need to tell the truth about my daughter, she'd said. Before it's too late. The producers nodded, made notes, assumed it was another family estrangement story. They'd seen hundreds. This seemed like one more. They had no idea what was coming. But Dr. Phil had sensed something else. When he walked onto the stage, the audience applauded as always. The lights were bright, the energy high. But when Dr. Phil looked at Margaret Chen sitting in that chair, something in her eyes made him pause. It was the look of someone carrying a weight so heavy, they could barely breathe. Margaret, Dr. Phil began, settling into his chair with that signature directness. You've told my producers you have something to say about your daughter. Let's start there. Margaret's hands gripped the armrests. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. My daughter's name was Emily. She disappeared in 1974. She was 6 years old. The audience murmured sympathetically. Missing children stories were heartbreaking, but not uncommon on the show. I'm so sorry, Dr. Phil said, leaning forward. Tell me what happened. Margaret took a breath that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. We were living in Sacramento. My husband, Emily's father, he worked construction. I was a nurse. We had a small house on Maple Street. Emily loved to ride her bike in the driveway. Her voice was mechanical, practiced, as if she'd rehearsed this story 1,000 times in the mirror. One afternoon in June, I was inside making dinner. Emily was outside playing. When I called her in, she was gone. Just gone. Her bike was there, lying on its side. But Emily... Margaret's voice cracked. The audience was completely silent now. Dr. Phil waited, giving her space. He'd learned decades ago that the most important thing he could do was let people speak at their own pace. The police came, Margaret continued. They searched everywhere. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. They never found her. They never found any trace. Dr. Phil's expression shifted. Something wasn't adding up. Margaret, he said carefully. You said her name was Emily. Past tense. But then you said she disappeared. Can you help me understand that? Margaret's hands began to shake violently. She looked down at her lap, and when she looked back up, tears were streaming down her face. Because, she whispered, because I know she's not missing. I've always known. The studio went completely silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. Dr. Phil sat perfectly still. What do you mean, you've always known? Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. It was yellowed with age, the edges worn from decades of handling. This, she said, holding it with both hands as if it were made of glass. This is a letter I wrote in 1974. The day after Emily disappeared. I sealed it, and I've carried it with me every day for 50 years. Dr. Phil stood up slowly. He walked toward Margaret, and the audience could see his entire demeanor change. This wasn't the Dr. Phil of catchphrases and tough love. This was a man who just realized he was standing at the edge of something profound. Margaret, he said softly, what's in that letter? She looked up at him, her face a mask of pain and relief. The truth. The truth I should have told 50 years ago. The truth that's been killing me every single day since. Dr. Phil turned to the cameras. Stop. Stop the tape right now. The red lights on the cameras blinked off. The audience gasped. In 21 seasons, Dr. Phil had never stopped a taping like this. Producers in the control room scrambled. The floor manager looked confused. Dr. Phil held up his hand to silence everyone. Margaret, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Whatever is in that letter, whatever you're about to tell us, once it's said, it's out there. There's no taking it back. Do you understand? Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely now. I understand. That's why I'm here. I'm 72 years old, Dr. Phil. I have lung cancer. Stage 3. The doctors say I have maybe a year. I can't die with this secret. I won't. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil sat down beside Margaret, not in his usual chair, but in the guest chair next to her. This simple act, breaking the physical barrier between host and guests, sent a ripple through the studio. He was no longer the interviewer. He was a witness. I'm going to ask you again, Dr. Phil said, his voice barely above a whisper. What happened to Emily? Margaret clutched the envelope to her chest. Emily didn't disappear. Emily never existed. Not the way I told people she did. The confusion in the studio was palpable. Dr. Phil's face showed he was processing, calculating, trying to understand. Help me understand what you're saying, he said. Margaret's next words would change everything. I had a son, she said. Not a daughter. A son named Elijah. He was 6 years old in 1974. And he told me he felt like a girl. He wanted to wear dresses. He wanted to be called Emily. And I couldn't handle it. The weight of those words settled over the studio like snow. No one moved. No one breathed. My husband threatened to leave. The neighbors were already talking. This was 1974, Dr. Phil. People didn't understand. Doctors called it a disorder. Churches called it a sin. I was terrified. Dr. Phil's expression remained neutral, but everyone could see the intensity in his eyes. What did you do, Margaret? She opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. I did something unforgivable. I sent him away. The studio audience gasped collectively. There was a facility in Nevada. They said they could fix him. Make him normal. My husband insisted. I was weak. I was scared. So I drove Elijah there myself. 6 years old. He was crying, begging me not to leave him. And I left him there. Margaret's voice broke completely. I told everyone Emily had disappeared. I played the grieving mother. Police searched. The community rallied. And all that time, my child was locked in a facility, being told he was sick, being punished for being himself. Dr. Phil stood up slowly. He walked to the edge of the stage, and everyone could see he was fighting to maintain his composure. When he turned back, his voice was thick with emotion. Margaret, where is your child now? She looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes was bottomless. I don't know. The facility closed in 1982. I tried to find her, but there were no records. It's like Elijah vanished into thin air. For real this time. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to his team. Get me research. Now. I want every piece of information about facilities in Nevada in the 1970s that dealt with gender identity in children. We're not ending this show until we find answers. The audience erupted in applause. Dr. Phil knelt beside her chair, something he'd never done in 21 seasons. Margaret, what you did caused tremendous harm to a child who needed love and protection. Do you understand that? Margaret nodded, unable to speak through her tears. But I also see someone who has carried this guilt for 50 years. Someone who is using what little time they have left to try to make it right. We're going to help you." The studio erupted in standing ovation. During the commercial break, Dr. Phil's research team was making calls. When cameras came back on, Dr. Phil had news. "We found something." Dr. Phil held a folder. There was a facility in Reno, Nevada, called the Washoe Rehabilitation Center. It operated from 1971 to 1982. Margaret's entire body was shaking. "That's where I took him." A video screen descended. Patricia Dominguez, a former nurse, appeared via satellite. "Patricia, do you remember a child named Elijah Chen?" Dr. Phil asked. Patricia closed her eyes. "Yes. A little boy, 6 or 7 when he arrived. So scared. He used to draw butterflies." Margaret sobbed. "Do you know where Elijah went after the facility closed?" "Most were sent to foster care. But I kept a journal. Names, dates. Elijah Chen was transferred to foster care in Sacramento in 1982. The family's name was Morrison." Dr. Phil turned to his team. "Find the Morrisons. Now." 20 minutes later, they had an answer. When cameras came back on, Dr. Phil stood center stage. Margaret sat in her chair, barely breathing. "Margaret, Dr. Phil said carefully. "We found the Morrisons. Robert passed away in 1998, but Helen is still alive. She's 91 years old, living in Sacramento. And..." He paused, and the entire studio leaned forward. "She remembers Elijah." Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Is she alive?" Dr. Phil held up his hand. "We've made contact with someone. But before we go any further, I need to be clear. This person may not want to reconnect. They may not be ready. We have to respect their wishes. Do you understand?" Margaret nodded frantically. "I just want to know they're okay. That's all. I just want to know I didn't destroy them completely." Dr. Phil picked up his phone. The studio was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. "I have someone on the line," he said. "They've agreed to listen, but they may not want to speak. Margaret, this is your chance to say what you need to say." He put the phone on speaker. The silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like 5 years. Then a voice. Not deep, not high. Somewhere in between. Slightly hoarse, as if from years of smoking or maybe just from years of holding things in. "This is Emily." Margaret collapsed forward, sobbing so hard her entire body shook. The audience was crying. Even the camera operators had tears streaming down their faces. "Emily," Margaret choked out. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was weak. I was scared. I failed you in every possible way. You were a child, and I was supposed to protect you, and instead I..." "Stop," the voice said. "Not angry. Not kind. Just tired. I've spent 50 years trying to understand why you left me there." Emily continued. 50 years wondering what was wrong with me. Wondering why I wasn't worth loving. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. There was nothing wrong with you, Margaret said through her tears. Nothing. You were perfect. You were brave. You knew who you were, and I punished you for it. I'm the one who was broken. Not you. Never you. The silence on the phone stretched again. Then, I'm 56 years old now. I've built a life. I have friends. I have a job I love. I paint. Do you remember that I used to draw? Butterflies. Margaret whispered. You drew butterflies. I still do, Emily said, and for the first time, there was something like warmth in her voice. I never stopped. Dr. Phil, standing to the side, looked like he was watching something sacred. He didn't interrupt. He barely moved. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily said. That's the truth. I don't know if I have that in me. But, she paused. But I'm glad you told the truth. Finally. After all these years, you told the truth. That's something. Margaret looked at Dr. Phil, desperate. Can I see her? Even just once? Dr. Phil looked at the phone. Emily, that's your choice. No pressure. No expectations. The silence stretched for 15 seconds. 20. 30. Then, there's a park in Sacramento. McKinley Park. The Rose Garden. I go there every Sunday at 2 p.m. I sit on the bench by the fountain. If someone wanted to find me there next Sunday, I wouldn't leave. The line went dead. Margaret sat in stunned silence, then looked up at Dr. Phil with an expression of pure, overwhelming gratitude. Dr. Phil knelt beside her again. Margaret, you have been given a gift that very few people get, a chance at redemption. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about you finding peace. This is about Emily. Everything from here on out is about what Emily needs. Can you do that? Yes, Margaret whispered. Whatever she needs. However long it takes. I have a year. Maybe less. But I'll spend every day I have left trying to be the mother I should have been 50 years ago. The studio gave a standing ovation that lasted 2 full minutes. When the audience finally settled, Dr. Phil turned to the camera, speaking directly to viewers at home. This story is about a lot of things. It's about secrets and shame. It's about courage, both Margaret's courage to finally tell the truth, and Emily's courage to survive and build a life despite unimaginable rejection. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. But most importantly, it's about this. It is never too late to tell the truth. It is never too late to try to make things right. Will it fix everything? No. Some damage can't be undone. But silence and secrets only make the damage worse. He turned back to Margaret. I'm going to have my team connect you with therapists who specialize in family reconciliation. I'm going to make sure you have support as you navigate this. And I want you to know something. He placed his hand on her shoulder. What you did 50 years ago was wrong. But what you're doing now, facing it, owning it, trying to make amends, that takes more strength than most people have. I see you, Margaret. And I hope Emily can see you too. What happened in that rose garden is private. But 2 weeks later, Dr. Phil received a painting in the mail. It showed 2 butterflies, one with torn wings, one with vibrant colors, resting on the same flower. On the back, thank you for creating the space for truth. E.Dr. Phil hung that painting in his office, where it remains today. It reminds him why he does what he does, not for ratings or fame, but for moments when truth, no matter how painful, finally breaks free. Margaret Chen passed away 8 months later. At her funeral, a woman in her 50s with paint under her fingernails sat in the back row. When everyone had left, she placed a single origami butterfly on the casket. The truth had taken 50 years to emerge. But in the end, it emerged. And that Dr. Phil believes is always worth fighting for.